Chapter 12. The rebuilt school had the same size but with a stronger, enhanced structure and looking bigger. The soldiers and some of the villagers who were free from their works in the field were diligently attaching the thatched roof under the afternoon unforgiving sun. Tian wiped the beads of sweat on his forehead because of the heat, even if he was sitting under the lush canopy. He was still sore, so he couldn't do much labor. He was only tying up the bunch of tack with Staff Sergeant Yod. The school was almost complete, but they still needed to wait for the equipment from the foundation in Bangkok. Hama Bingley said that they'd be lucky to get a supply before the new year. But if luck wasn't on their side, it could take even 2 more weeks to get everything. He couldn't wait to start teaching his pupils again and asked the stern captain to join in the kite competition one more time. Ken wrapped the tack into bundles and tied them to a bamboo core the way Staff Sergeant Yod had taught him. Depressed. He should have asked for more medicine from the doctor. His new heart didn't show any signs of resistance. Perhaps he could take the medication less frequently so they would last until the middle of next month. By evening, after other villagers and soldiers who came to help had already left, only 2 rangers remained on guard outside to see the teacher home. Tien's thin form was bending over and rummaging through the remaining items that survived the fire in the unfinished school until he found what he was looking for. He grabbed a nail and picked up a hammer. He climbed on a small cabinet that stood at his waist to put the nail on a pole under a bamboo beam, and hung the calendar that bore the image of King Bhumibol, burned at a corner, as a reminder to his students when they looked up. The city boy slowly turned to look at his classroom from the height, thinking of the time he taught and played with his little pupils. He didn't know they could become so close in just 2 months. I don't want to leave. So what he had to do was to try, no matter how risky it would be to be here as long as he could. Since the showdown with the illegal loggers days ago, the Rangers were working in shifts to protect the daredevil volunteer teacher 24/7. They stood guard even at night around his hut, worrying that Master Sakda's goons might return to take revenge. Tian parted ways with the 2 rangers when he reached the route towards his accommodation. But once he got closer, he saw movement inside his house, and his heart shuddered. He should have asked the 2 soldiers to walk with him until he reached the stairs. He looked for a good size of dry log to use as a weapon and slowly crept up the stairs and shouted, "Who's there?" Hearing no answer, he peeked in to take a look. The log dropped from his hand and he lunged forward at someone with an utter alarm. "Captain!" He stopped in front of the tall man who still wore a cast on his right arm with a supporter around his neck. The intense, dark, handsome face still looked ashen, yet the captain was in much better shape than the previous day. The thick lips tucked into a faint smile, the kind that wiped a smile off Tian's face. "How come you get out of the hospital so soon? I thought it would be a few more days." Tian raked his eyes over the wound that wasn't covered by the supporting cloth, worried. "I still have unfinished business." The captain's slow voice sounded almost robotic. "With the illegal loggers?" Captain Pupa fixed his eyes on the younger man's glistening brown eyes, but his own eyes were empty. He walked towards the window and gazed out aimlessly. The wealthy boy frowned, knowing that something inside the captain had changed. It was as if they were mere strangers now. Before he asked, the tall officer spoke up first. "Are you having fun here?" "What?" Tian blurted out, puzzled. "Captain, are you okay? Did you have any brain trauma?" Pupa didn't say a word. After a long pause, he slowly turned to face the younger man.
If you've had enough fun, then go home.
What fun! I don't get it.
Don't make your father more worried than he already is.
That one single sentence sounded like a curse that had turned him into a stone. Father, all the dots were connected and crystal clear. Ken balled his hands into a fist and gritted his teeth. You know my father? The young captain held back his words for a millisecond before answering in a plain, emotionless voice.
Your father was once my superintendent.
So you got an order to keep an eye on me? Is that it? Ken exploded and shouted at the man who stood still like a statue. His heart quivered with hurt and disappointment. Pupa simply nodded, his face the picture of deep exhaustion with all the chaos that had happened.
You don't think that a soldier like me had enough free time to teach someone how to boil water or wash the clothes?
The cold indifference radiating from the captain hurt more than his sharp words. Ken pressed his lips tight as he glared at Pupa, trying to find the truth within the deepest crevice of his heart. It was as if the other man had turned into a total stranger. Are you saying that without the order, you wouldn't have paid attention to me at all?
Yes, you got it right.
As the captain finished his words, Tian kicked a plastic bottle of water nearby and sent it into the bamboo wall where his caretaker stood. The water in the bottle splashed onto the captain's face. The former scoundrel lunged at the captain and grabbed his shirt. He was seething with anger and yelled, So now you got an order to take me back and you're here to finish your job. What a good soldier you are!
Tien, let go of me.
Pupa tried to stay calm to douse the younger man's ferocity, but it worked like throwing more oil into the flame. I'm not letting go of you, you jerk! You're nothing but a liar! The more he said, the more inaudible his voice became, wrecked by sobbing. Are you saying that what you've been doing is just lies? Tian closed his burning eyes as sorrow gripped his heart. He pressed his forehead against the broad, solid chest that had once protected him as strength left his body. What's happening to us now? Captain Pupa stared at the slender form with a shattered heart. All he wanted to do was to keep the younger man here. Yet, as he thought of the bright future lying ahead of Tian, his two rough hands that were weathered by hardship had to let the boy go. We are just too different. It was time to return the other man to his world. Pupa took in a deep breath, trying to summon the strength to shield his bleeding heart.
You came here because of someone, didn't you?
The city boy looked up, his eyebrows knitted into a deep frown with utter fear. Who are you talking about?
The girl in the diary.
Pupa glanced at the pastel book that was taken out and put on the mattress.
I know the truth. You don't have to lie anymore.
How dare he rummage through my stuff? Tian violently pushed the other man away, his lips shaking and hot tears sprang up from his reddened eyes. I I never lied.
But you never told me the truth either.
What truth do you want? Tian yelled at the top of his lungs. The truth that our fun was my heart donor? The truth that got possessed by the idea to live in this hard place on the hill just like she did? Fuck! He punched at the bamboo wall and the whole hut shook. He exploded, knowing that they had reached the point of no return. The captain's intense dark eyes shone brightly. He yanked the thin hand that punched the hut closer.
Are you saying that a wealthy man like you just woke up one day with an urge to do something for the poor? Stop making fun of me. Your game was over. Pack your bags and tomorrow Staff Sergeant Yod will take you to the bus station.
The words cut right through his heart, sending the pang all over his chest. Yes, it had been a curiosity to see a world different than his at first. Then it was a pure stubbornness to survive here. But everything he had been doing for this village, until this very right moment, was from the tie he had developed with the place and the people, born at the bottom of his heart. If it wasn't such a bond, what else could it be? I'm leaving, but not tomorrow. He twisted his wrist free and wiped the snot at the tip of his nose with determination. I felt sorry for Turfan that she passed away in such a tragic accident. Her heart gave me a new life. If you have read her diary, you must have seen the last wish. Pupa's face darkened.
You want to?
But before he finished his sentence, the stubborn young man growled, all I ask is 5 more days, from today until the end of the year. Tian glared into the captain's harsh eyes. Your last duty is to wait for me there, at midnight. He slapped against his left chest as a promise to the beating heart. And then I will take her away from here. All of his senses dimmed. Saying goodbye tomorrow would be like dashing his heart and bleeding just once. But to count the days until they parted ways was a slow, painful death. Pupa's lips tugged into a sad smile, feeling sorry for himself. What else could he do but nodding in agreement? So be it! Tian raised his chin in defiance, his face still painted with faint bruises, and shouted, I don't want to see your face any longer! Get out of my sight! Captain Pupa pushed down his emotions and spun around, leaving without looking back. The sun was vanishing from the horizon near the mountain ridge, making the temperature drop to a bone-chilling degree. He kept on walking like a soulless body before stopping at the old motorcycle he had parked near a tall tree. The officer slumped to his knees as all strength drained from his limbs. He stared at the hands that had wiped the tears from the boy's face, ones that he couldn't even lift today.
I want you to be here.
Forever. His crackling, deep voice was swept by the cold, merciless wind, for all the way to reach that someone's heart that had closed off in front of him. Later in the afternoon, Kama Bingle carried the stainless steel pinto into the volunteer teacher's hut, his face a picture of deep concern for the younger man. Tian didn't leave the house for 2 days. When he came to visit, he found the boy curling up under the blanket with a distressed look on his face. All he said was he hadn't been feeling well and he wanted to rest. He barely touched the meals cooked by the elder's wife. Bing Le made up his mind that if Tian still wasn't feeling well today, he'd better take him downhill to see a doctor. And then all his doubt was answered when Staff Sergeant Yod, who had been patrolling in the area, stopped to talk to him. He learned that the teacher would leave after the new year, but once he asked why he wouldn't complete his 3-month term, there was no answer. Besides, Captain Pupa was nowhere to be found after the day he had been released from the hospital and came to the village in a hurry. Or perhaps they had a fight.
Clutien.
Bingley called in front of the hut. When there was no answer, he took the liberty to walk up the stairs and found shattering clothes all over the hut, with the younger man sitting hugging his knees. The older man put the foot carrier on the floor as he crouched down and touched the thin shoulder.
You'd better eat first when the food's still hot.
I'm not hungry. A low, crackling voice came out from under the face that was hidden against the knees. Kama Bingley let out a long sigh and sat down next to the younger man. Physical wounds could be healed, but emotional ones? How could he how could one heal those?
Staff Sergeant Yod told me everything. You have to leave after the new year. Time flies just like that, doesn't it?
Ian pressed his lips. What had been swimming around his head wasn't about his return to Bangkok, but that man's words, who repeatedly stated that he had been given a strict order to keep an eye on him while he was here. All that the man had done didn't come from his own volition. All the warmth, the care, and the attentiveness he'd shown were mere duty. Fuck, it hurts more than a broken heart. The city boy looked up, his eyes swollen red, and turned towards the visitor, who was looking at him with worries. He forced out a smile. I've run away from home. Bingle's eyes widened with surprise, but he quickly pushed it down and waited for the next words. Tian shifted his focus from the man to the pastel diary that lay next to his backpack. My father was a deputy commander of the Thai military who recently retired. When I left a letter before coming here, I wondered why no one came after me. Turned out, I've been under the radar from the beginning. The memory of the first day he met the imposing officer in front of the hut that night made his eyes burn. What he had been given wasn't freedom, just short-term permission to taste the outside world. Tian chuckled dryly at the cruelest joke. When things turned too bad, he just got another order to send me back. Ama Bingley held his breath for a millisecond as he realized who the young man was referring to. As the village chief, he had been watching the two men from afar. They might have been in verbal spars regularly, but never once they would be so upset with one another to the point of treating the other like he didn't exist. And yet, Captain Pupa's close watch on the younger man made him wonder many times. He sensed that their relationship, even friendship, wasn't solely based on duty.
Even if it was an order, Captain Pupa's concern for you was real.
Uncle Bingley hadn't been there with him that day. That man's cold voice and eyes void of emotions had been more real than anything else. I don't want to hear his name anymore. The beautiful eyes hardened, and the older man was wary. If Tian didn't feel anything towards the captain, why would he be so upset?
Alright, I won't mention him anymore.
Bingley rubbed his face to relax.
You haven't been outside for days, so you're not aware. We're having a pre-New Year party.
A party? As soon as he saw that he got the younger man's attention, the village chief started explaining.
Akha's New Year Day is a swing ceremony held in September, but we decided to add 3 day and 3 night celebration for the International New Year's Day so the villagers who have been working hard all year round can take a rest from working in the field.
He finished the sentence and opened the food container.
My wife cooked for everyone, but she made this mild taste food just for you because you're still not feeling well.
Tian looked at the plain soup with egg tofu and minced pork and the warm jasmine rice, feeling overwhelmed. Thank you so much. He was touched by the older man's kindness, so he started eating even if he wasn't feeling like it, swallowing the food down. Once the food hit an empty stomach, the enzyme gushed out to work. Tian winced as he felt the burn all over his stomach. Finally, he succumbed to the force of nature, so he munched and finished all the food. Kama Bing led and invited him to the women's embrace yard, or the cultural yard in the middle of the village to join in the revelry.
You're running out of time. Please make the most of it.
That was the elder's words that made Tian get up from his mattress to wash his face at the earthen jar behind the hut and feel fresh again. The singing in unison with the lively rhythm of folk music could be heard from the distance. The yard was packed with people who were taking days off to rest and celebrate after the long hard year. Young women were fully dressed in their best garments, wearing a hat with patterned metal plates hanging from the accessory, creating lovely chimes as they walked. They were dancing, moving their hands in a choreography that rhymes with their feet, creating a beautiful scene for young men who were drinking, eating, and cheering on around them. The Akka children, who were running and playing, came to a halt as they spotted their teacher standing still by the elder's side. They ran towards Tien, who still looked exhausted. Let's go there! We've got so many food and snacks from the city! Miju pulled the teacher's hand to follow her to a large litter where many people stood by. Tien glanced at men in greenish khaki camouflage uniforms among the locals, feeling dismayed as he saw that the man wasn't there. The soldiers took snacks and canned drinks available in supermarkets and gave them to the kids as New Year presents according to the international calendar. The girl handed him a red canned soda with a big smile. Big Crayon, drink this black water. It's good. The other teacher thronged to give their teacher some snacks.
You're their beloved teacher, aren't you?
A familiar, deep voice spoke up right next to his ears, making the city boy jump. He spun around. Ibok Nam! The fair-skinned, slanted-eyed doctor moved his eyeglasses and grinned.
What? Why did you jump like that? You thought I was the other guy?
No! Ian barked and opened the can of Coca-Cola to gulp it down and kill his frustration.
Alright, no is no.
The medical officer drawled, but not buying it. Then his gaze shifted.
Can we talk in private?
The volunteer teacher looked away. If you want to talk about your best friend, I don't.
But I do.
Wasant grabbed Ian's thin wrist.
We have a lot to talk about.
He stressed the words as he gazed into the light brown burning eyes. The doctor made up his mind without waiting for an answer. He pulled the young man, who struggled a little, away from the crowd as Tian scowled. They came to the waterfall, far away from the yard, where Wazant asked him to sit down under a tree. Tian frowned, not knowing why they were soaking their feet in the water to relax instead of going straight to the point. Tian moved his legs up and down, stirring the water to disturb the minnows swimming in the basin until they saw away. He turned at the man next to him, losing his temper. Just spit it out, won't you?
I took you here to cool your head. Guess it didn't work.
The doctor let out a laugh, not caring if the other man was trying to bite his head off.
Okay, before we start talking, can you tell me what you and Fu talk about that day that made things explode like this?
He told me to go home.
Is that it?
He called me a liar. Said I came here just for fun, and if I stay longer, it would only put him into more trouble. He had to take care of me even if he didn't want to. The city boy picked up a small rock and threw it away to vent. Who's the real liar here? He was on my tail because of my father's specific order. He's such a good actor who should win an Oscar.
Yeah, true. He became so absorbed in the role that he's eating his tears instead of food.
Wasn't deadpan, but his words made Tian glue his eyes on him. The doctor inhaled and looked up at the small birds flying over them in the sky.
Captain Pupa is a resolute man. Once he's made up his mind, he would do whatever it takes to accomplish it, even if it kills him. I'm not surprised that Pooch chose such an extreme measure.
He looked back at Tian, who was stunned by the words.
If someone I care the most has a bright future ahead of him, I'll try to push him away, no matter how hard it is. To hold him back is selfishness. It'll hurt the one you care about because our worlds are too different.
Tian heard all the words loud and clear. His brain was laden with the information as he watched the cascade falling against a rock shelf for a moment. "He could have told me nicely. Why did he have to hurt me?" His voice trailed off.
It meant that he's made up his mind. If he begged you, you would have stayed here forever.
Wasant stated matter-of-factly, making Tien's eyes widen. The volunteer teacher trembled as if he was stabbed right through the heart and all the hidden emotions were breaking free. "No, I'm not. No," he blurted out, not wanting to believe it, but his voice was almost inaudible that it made the mastermind grin. Wazan took his arm in a firm grip.
Yen, you know too well that his feelings for you are real. Don't mind his biting words because they were haunting and hurting him in the worst possible way.
How how is he doing?" Tian asked, not wanting to admit that he was worried.
Like a dead man.
Wazan said grimly.
If there is another attack, I'm sure he'll run into the bullets and give up his life on the battlefield. He's like a living dead anyway. He'd better be off dead.
The doctor glanced at the younger man. Once he saw the shivering glint in Tian's eyes, he launched another attack on the boy's weak spot.
If you don't believe me, I'll take you to see it with your own eyes. You can make up your mind how you want to end this.
Tian fell silent as his heart and his mind warred. Finally, he let Dr. Wason drag him away one more time. This time they were heading towards Pa Prapirun operating base 3 kilometers away. Silence fell inside the official jeep that ran along a narrow road. Both men sat wordlessly in the front, making the 10-minute drive to the border operating base stretched awkwardly. Ken looked straight ahead in his passenger seat as if the view held his attention, and it was nothing but trees. His mind was in turmoil. On one hand, he told himself he shouldn't have come with the doctor. On the other hand, it wouldn't hurt to look at the captain. He wouldn't meet him face to face, so there was nothing to be afraid of.
Yen, let the guard see you, please.
Dr. Wasant broke the silence, making the man who was gazing out the windshield jump. "Yes." He turned towards the security. A soldier in a camouflage uniform with a loaded AK-47 stared at the visitor and looked into the vehicle. When he saw no weapons or hazardous substance, he saluted the doctor and allowed the car to go through. Wasant parked the jeep in the garage and took the teacher for a walk. The accommodation of the troop's commanding officer stood at the far end, so it was quieter than the one in the front, where soldiers were walking in and out between the kitchen and the armory all the time. The orange evening sunlight bathed the sky, reflecting against the dark silhouette of the wooden house that stood on tall poles with space underneath, casting a long shadow to the front. The wind swept coldness from the mountain top and hit the thin frame, who was wearing only a jacket over a t-shirt, making Tian shiver.
I'm leaving you here. I think Hu is still bedridden.
The doctor said to the man who was rooted, stunned at the foot of the stairs. "You can wait for me here. I'm just taking a short look. It won't take long."
I don't think it will be that quick. I'll wait for you in the kitchen hall.
Wasant shot the younger man a cunning grin and spun around, pacing away quickly before Tian could stop him. He didn't listen to me. Tian wanted to stomp his feet to let out his frustration. In the end, he looked up at the house in front of him with a heavy heart. After a moment of hesitation, he rubbed his face to summon his strength. "All right, just a short sneak peek wouldn't kill a man." Tian tiptoed up the stairs and crouched down to crawl at the door that was left ajar. He poked it with a finger, pushing it open to create a small gap and lowering his head to look inside. He scanned over the room until his eyes caught the sight of a tall form slumping on a narrow field bed. In front of the man stood a desk he dragged closer to him to put a bowl of hot pork porridge, a six-man's dinner. The officer became haggard. His cheekbones and jaws were even more prominent, looking ashen than the last time he'd seen him. The sunken, intense dark eyes looked almost lifeless as the man gazed at the wooden wall. His good left hand moved to pick up a spoon and scoop up the porridge, looking like a robot that was programmed to eat. And the stainless steel spoon with the hot food fell from his hand, hitting the desk with a loud clang. The man who was hiding closed his mouth, devastated. The man in the room only looked up, still unmoving and uncaring about his reddened lips that got burned by the food. The young captain, who had been sick in both his body and mind, moved as if to pick the spoon, but he stopped in his track as he heard the door swing open. The volunteer teacher's slender form that he hadn't seen in days was stomping towards him. Ken snatched the food-stained spoon before he could, and the young man dropped down on the field bed next to him. He scooped the hot porridge and gently blowing it. Pupa gazed into the almond eyes that were glaring at him as Tien pulled the food. A minute passed, and he finally opened his mouth to take the food. He looked at the younger man, who repeated the action without saying a word, his heart filled with surprise and contentment. But when he realized Tien was acting like someone, a pang shot right through his heart. It was usual for someone who had a near-death experience and a miraculous survival would be such susceptible. If that someone dodged the bullet by taking an organ from a donor, how much more susceptible he would be. Normally, the hospital kept organ donors' names top secrets, so he was at the end of his wit how Tien managed to find out. The diary that recorded everything its owner wrote down sent the young man with a bright future on a guilt trip. It finally led him to leave his luxurious life behind to live in this harsh place. He was only trying to live someone else's life, even if his feelings had merged with those of the other persons. That was the reason why the impenetrable Captain Pupa was heartbroken. All this time, he had never experienced the real Tien, not his feelings, not his thoughts. The city boy held the spoon with when the thick, shapely lips wouldn't open to take the food. He glanced at the captain, who merely stared at him and put down the spoon. I don't want to do this, but you're hurt because you helped me. I was just trying to repay my debt. Tien forced out the words. He was acting petulant, but this tall, unmoving officer still didn't react. It drove him crazy. Captain, I should be the one who's moping, not you. You told me to get lost, and I learned that my family's been keeping eyes on me.
You're right.
Pupa's voice cracked as he spoke.
You're disappointed, but you're not hurt.
Tien frowned deeply, his face twisted with frustration. Are you done with your sarcasm? You don't even know what I think or how I feel. The officer smiled humorlessly, with eyes void of emotions.
You're right. I don't.
The younger man bowed his hands, trying to push down his anger. He had just told the man he came here to repay him, not to start a fight. He changed the subject. You eat your food. I'll help you. As he reached out at the spoon, the older man shook his head.
That's fine. I'm full.
Why are you so stubborn? Your wounds wouldn't heal. Shapely lips cocked in a dry smile, the kind that said he was feeling sorry for himself.
I will never heal, Tien. Never.
The younger man knew which wounds the man was talking about, but hearing it from an indestructible man who was crackling and crumbling down like this, his heart hurt as if being stabbed by 100 knives. I can't take it any longer. Tien slapped on the canvas on the field bed and exploded all that he had bottled up at this moment. If you were nasty to me only to end up like this, why didn't you treat me better? You know I'm leaving sooner or later. I just want to go away with a beautiful memory. Almond eyes burned with tears as Tian gazed at the captain. Especially with you. Pupa was stunned. He lifted his good hand to cup the smooth cheek, wiping the tear at the corner of Tian's eye with his thumb as gently as a border soldier as he could.
I'm sorry.
He said faintly.
I was startled.
Startled that I was Thorfun's organ recipient?
More startled by the fact that you carry her diary with you.
I know I did something wrong, the wealthy city boy spluttered out. I shouldn't have looked for my organ donor. Pupa touched his cheek and caressed the silken hair that touched the boy's cheek, as he said something that shook Tian to the core.
It's alright. Just be yourself and stop living someone's life.
Tian's eyes widened. His breath stopped as his brain went blank. He had read the diary repeatedly to appreciate the locals' kindness, the love and the respect of the pupils, and the characteristics of the tall officer even before he traveled here. This, did this mean that the entire bond that formed between them was born of Thorfon's feelings? His conscience was bombarded with confusion. The tears that had dried sprung up once again like a broken dam on the ashen face. So, this life he was living belonged to Miss Thorfan Sharon Paul, the beautiful and gracious volunteer teacher, not to Mr. Tien Safadiseko, the loser rich guy who never had anything tangible in his life, not even the man right next to him? No, that's not true, he muttered like a man who's losing his mind. His whole body trembled with violent sobbing from the truth he couldn't accept. Pupa closed his eyes. His heart was gripped in an invisible claw that was crushing it. If he could, he would take all the pain from the young man and bear it all by himself. Yet, Tien would still be under the spell of the deceased girl. Even if it hurt like hell, this has to end. The young captain took away the hand that was rubbing at the reddened eyes and gently wiped the boy's tears away. I feel as if my body and my heart are two separate beings. Yen's voice cracked as he said, I don't know what to do next.
Just go back to the beginning. Think why you came here.
The city boy went silent, trying to piece all the shattering thoughts together until he finally found the answer. I came here to fulfill Thorfon's last wish, the one she made upon the stars at the New Year's Eve, where she confessed her love to you on that cliff. Pupa took in a deep breath. Finally, his dream was coming to its final chapter.
Do you know that the word pan here doesn't mean to share as in the Thai word? It's from the Lana dialect that means 1,000.
Papandao, Ken repeated the name, letting it sink in how powerful the name was.
A legend said that if you stand on the cliff and count the stars in the sky until you reach 1,000 stars, your wish will come true.
Thin lips parted long before a voice came out. If I can do it, will I get a miracle? The officer smiled gently, the handsome face painted with a hint of desperation and resignation.
I have no idea. No one has gotten to 1,000 stars before.
Tama Bingla's son, who came home during the New Year holidays, went to see his friend, who was a little older than him, at the hut standing at the edge of the village. They went through thick and thin together in a short time. He shouted Tian's name for a while but didn't get any answer. He went to the women's embrace yard where the adults hung out and drank. Longpei walked around looking for his friend, but he was nowhere to be seen. When he asked the guys if they knew where he was, someone told him the young city man had left for the north of the village since late morning. The north? Maybe he had headed to the waterfall. The young Akha, in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans like city people, went towards the direction. If he couldn't find Tian there, he intended to return and wait for him at the hut. Once his father had told him that the teacher would be leaving after the new year, he was disappointed. Even if the other man was reckless and hot-headed, he was an honest man, a rare breed these days. The, the sound of a thundering cascade when the water hit the basin could be heard from the distance. Long Tay stopped and looked, finally spotting the man he had been looking for, hunching on the ground, looking dejected, and warily throwing small rocks into the water by the bank. He walked closer and pulled at him. Are you feeling well, Pitien? You walk quite a distance. Tian looked up at the man who stood above him with sunken eyes from the lack of sleep. Are you on a long weekend? Yes. Long Day took the liberty to sit down cross-legged next to the other man. Something is bothering you, isn't it? You don't want to go home in Bangkok? I didn't want to at first. Now I do. This means someone made you upset. The younger man teased, but the sad expression on the older friend's face made him shut up. He stole a glance at Tien, not knowing what to say to make him feel better. If you trust me, you can talk to me. Tien reached out and slapped the boy's thick shoulder a few times. It's alright. I just don't feel like myself. That's it. How come you don't feel like yourself? If not yourself, who are you feeling like? The son of the village chief asked innocently, but it made the other man went still. Let's say, the city boy said faintly. What if our heart was replaced with someone else's, and that heart carries the last memory in it? You think that someone else's memory will take over you? Long Tay was speechless for a moment and let out a chuckle. Is this a sci-fi movie or something, bro? Think about it. How can a heart contain a memory? It's just an organ. Turning into someone because you have their heart is a figment of your imagination. Imagination? Hearing honest feedback from someone who didn't know about his operation, he had an epiphany. He had let the girl's story take over his mind and overwhelm his thoughts. If he thought of her as a dead woman, she would still be a dead woman. In retrospect, his curiosity had led him down the rabbit hole. It was him who decided to come to this outback up on the hill. If he had chosen to let things slip by, even if he had found out about the donor, he'd still be the youngest son of Safa de Seco family who would have been dining in some five-star restaurant or on a shopping spree in a luxurious mall in the city. He would have never experienced the true kindness from others like he was experiencing now. His face split into a wide smile that gave Long Day goosebumps, fearing it was a sign of foreseeable trouble. Bro, you sure you're not? Are you sure you're okay? Thanks a lot, bro. What? Long Tay blurted out, bewildered by the city boy's mood swing. It's getting sunny here. Let's move. The volunteer teacher changed the topic and asked the younger man to walk back to the village with him. The tall boy nodded in agreement, and something came to him as he rose to his feet. I forgot to tell you something. My dad asked me to go see him at the school at 1. Ian looked at his wristwatch, seeing that it was half an hour to 1. He asked the boy to accompany him to the school. Do you have any idea why the uncle wanted to see me there? I guess the supply from the foundation has arrived, Long Tay said and walked off, leaving the bewildered teacher behind as Tien scratched his head. Never knew Thailand Post worked even during a public holiday. They were such hard-working people, weren't they? The school on the cliff was completed. The only things missing were a new blackboard, textbooks, and other equipment that had been burned down in the fire. Once they neared the school, the teacher heard laughter coming from the students who were running around. When he set foot in front of the school, he stopped in his track. and so did his breath. Pieces of A4 papers with clear tapes were put together into a giant sign at the beam that stuck out from the school. Letters written with color pens and painted with crayons, smudges that scattered out of the frames could be read together in a phrase, Happy New Year. All of a sudden, the little pupils thronged out to throw their arms around his waist, shouting in unison, Happy New Year, in heavily accented Thai dialect. Yet the greetings echoed in his mind. Tian looked up at Kama Bingle and his son, who had big smiles plastered on their faces. And he knew who the mastermind was. Long Tay cupped his hands around his mouth, whispering, Surprise! The city boy glared back to hide his embarrassment. Ju and Ai, the Akha's sister and older brother, took the teacher's hand towards a mat that acted as a desk. An assortment of snacks was laid out on the mat, from canned crackers to cookies and sodas. It reminded Tian of a New Year party when he was in elementary school. Easy, Tian! We got that too! Michu was especially thrilled, looking at the big piece of dessert with chocolate cream on top and strawberry jam decoration in the middle. Tian smiled at the girl's innocence before telling her, That's a cake. Cake. The kids recited the word in unison, making the teacher's heart swell with pride. Once he told them they could start eating the snacks, they all jumped in. He backed away towards the two men who stood nearby. You like it, bro? Dad told me to take him to the city and buy these snacks and the cake for the party. Longpei explained how they got to have this small and warm party. I saw that you were feeling down. I imagine that city people like to throw a big party, but for rural people like us, this is the best thing we could give you. Once he finished the sentence, Bingle's hands shot up to answer the why from the younger man. Thank you so much, Uncle. It wasn't the prices of things that counted. It was the effort that did. This is the best party I've ever had in my life. Yen was telling the truth. No five-star hotel parties could have given him such contentment like this one did. The volunteer teacher crouched down and used a big kitchen knife to cut the chocolate cake into pieces as the students surrounded him with expectant bright eyes. They didn't have forks, so they took a piece by hand, not worrying about germs. Ken munched on the dessert that tasted almost bland, but its value was incomparable in his contented heart. He glanced at the younger friend who was suckling on the soda, suddenly feeling an urge to tease him. He cleared his throat to call out at Longpei. You know what? We city people do have some norms for our parties. What norms? Longtay asked, curious. Tian's lips split into an evil grin as the prey was ensnared. Like this! He scooped the chocolate cream with one finger and smeared it on the younger man's cheek, bursting into a laugh. Longpei was frozen, shocked. This wasn't a norm, but personal revenge. The kids saw what happened and ran towards the teacher to swarm him. How dare you! Dan shut up his feet and chased after the kids. The bellow of laughter rang loud in the small school. Even Kama Bingle, who stood by, became a casualty of the cream war. The teacher's handsome and fair face was now smeared with the cream, and yet he was smiling widely. There would be no more chances he could create a moment like this with his students. This was one moment he had to make the most out of, memorabilia to cherish when the time came for him to say goodbye. And yet he didn't have the heart to say goodbye now. The kerosene lamp glowed softly inside the tiny hut. Clothes that had been hung to dry on the window frames and the terrace were gone. like the ones that scattered on the floorware. The expensive backpack got bigger than the first day he'd arrived. The rectangular mosquito net was still covering the body that lied face down in the middle of the hut. Ken supported himself on his elbows on the old mattress as he focused on the diary. After I came here, I discovered another dream apart from being a teacher for the Hill Tribe. The prince I've found had transformed my world from a colorless one to the most beautiful one. He's warm and kind, but he likes to wear a scowl on his face. But even that stern face can't hide his gentleness. Tien's thin lips cocked into a light smile. The captain was a gentleman who liked men. One day I heard a villager who speaks some Thai say that if you stand on the highest cliff at midnight and make a wish, it will come true. It seems impossible, but what can a hopeless girl like I do? If I confess my love to my prince among the hundreds and thousands of stars on the New Year's Eve night, that will be such a romantic evening. So, after I've come to Bangkok and seen my father who's sick with alcoholism, I'll give it a try, even if it might sound crazy. So please wait for me, my beloved prince. The ink trail stopped right there, forever. The girl got it a bit wrong. She had to stand there on the cliff and count the thousand stars to be able to make a wish. He had asked Long Tay to confirm the legend. The boy had laughed and said it was just a made up urban legend to lure people to enjoy the night view on the hill, much like an interesting background story for a brand's content marketing. Tian didn't care whether it was a made up story or a real legend. Perhaps this was the only thing he agreed with Thorfinn. A hopeless person would always look for a miracle. The volunteer teacher closed the diary. It was a quiet, lonely night that even the crickets were almost silent. He picked his down jacket to put on before putting out the light. Ken grabbed the flashlight near the mattress and walked down the stairs. The small road in the village was lit by torches. Once he left the vicinity, he had to depend on the flashlight. He rarely came to this cliff, and only did so when he and the students played games. Yet he remembered the way. If he walked along the tea plantation route towards the east, he would find a slope that led towards the upper cliff. Even if he was surrounded by a forest, he wasn't frightened. It was a sparse forest with tall and small trees that made one comfortable. The pervasive fragrance of sweet osmanthus made him feel alive. It was exactly 11:30 p.m. He intended to come before the appointment time because he wanted to count 1,000 stars. It wasn't a challenging number to accomplish, yet he didn't want to tempt fate. If it was easy, someone would have done it a long time ago. Once he showed up from the canopy of the last tree, he saw a vast open yard. Ken halted for a moment before lurching forward to stand in the middle of the open space, spinning around and looking up at the waves of glittering stars in the dark curtain of the night sky, astounded by the moonless beauty. This was what they called the Sea of Stars. His heart fluttered, trembled by a sudden fear that shot through his body and nearly drained all strength from his limbs. The stars were beautiful, that this place should be registered as a national tourist attraction. Yet the density of lights that made it impossible to count them one by one was frightening. Tian looked down at the ground to adjust his eyesight, taking in a deep breath to summon his courage. The smooth face looked up again at the sky as he pointed his index finger to count the stars. 100, 200, 300. Then his vision blurred. He needed the throbbing eye sockets and moved to the other end of the yard where more stars seemed to scatter more. Their typical counting turned into suctioning as the cliff was so high that the sky seemed to be so close one could reach it. The shimmering lights of 100,000 stars were brighter than the usual that they made his sight become hazy and light sensitive. The city boy shook his head, nauseated from a headache. He slumped down to rest his eyes in the middle of the quiet night as his confidence waned. He had counted 500 stars, and everything became blinding white. He balled his fist and punched the ground to let out his frustration. Shit! 1,000. He just had to count 1,000 stars. If Tien Sufadisako couldn't do it, then he would be a loser. He took in a deep breath to cheer himself up once again and rose to his feet. Reality is always cruel. Only willpower won't do it. The man who tried to challenge a human's limit thought of a new method. He turned around in 180 degrees, counting the stars until his eyes got tired before turning towards the other direction in order not to repeat the same stars. An idea flashed in his mind. What he was doing were utter nonsense and pure stupidity. Yet his stubbornness always spiked up the chart whenever failure challenged him. This worked best. His counts got higher as he reached 800. The city boy turned the other way and pointed his finger at the sky, elated, and yet he couldn't keep it up for so long. The bright lights above hurt his eyes until they became painful. His head was spinning and he wanted to throw up, but he went on. 955, 956. As he turned the other way, he almost fell, and the scene before him nearly turned white. He slapped his cheeks, waking himself up, and lifted a finger to start counting. Yet the sections he had calculated in his head already disappeared, and all the 100,000 stars had gathered and formed a sparkling arch in the night sky. Tian was panting as he saw success vanish before his eyes. He let out a maddening laugh. His shaking fingers still counted the stars even if he knew it was in vain. 997? 998? Brown eyes gazed aimlessly. Warm, wet tears sprung up and made everything dim as his eyes lost their focus. Still, he kept his feet rooted to the ground and went on counting. 999? All of a sudden, things went black. Warm palms that were closing on his eyes made his nostrils hot like coal. A low whisper near his ear was comforting.
You can stop.
The young captain was plastered against the boy's back, and his shadow cast over Tien's like a shield against the cold breeze. Tears of disappointment and sorrow gushed out through the rough fingers, soaking the officer's hands. I couldn't make it, even for this one last try. Tien bit his lips till they bled, unable to hold back a sob any longer. Even if he could have made it, his wish would never come true anyway. Puba's intense eyes softened with sadness. He said, gently,
You've done your best.
I didn't do it for their fun. She said. The city boy shouted, so the whole forest and the man would finally get him. I did it for myself. He spun to face the taller man. Even if his face was wet with tears, Tian's face was a picture of strength. I don't want to leave this place. I don't want to leave you. Before the captain could answer, he tensed up as Tian threw his arms around him and tiptoed to give him a violent kiss, pouring his heart and soul into this wordless confession. It was a moment later that the young man pulled back, but his arms still lingered around the strong neck as he laid his head on one thick shoulder. Even if it all started because of Thorfinn, all of the feelings are mine. The voice was indistinct with sobbing, but the words were like a blessing that flooded into the captain, healing all his wounds. Pupa lifted his good arm and embraced the slender form, holding him tight. He lovingly pressed his nose on the soft, fragrant hair.
And this is my feelings.
I'll protect you with all of my heart. Ken smiled in tears. Why was the happiness he'd been searching for was so ephemeral? He wanted to stop time right here, so things stood still. leaving all of the rules and the reasons, living without having to think about anyone else. He clutched the camouflage jacket until it crumpled, for he knew too well what he wished for was impossible. When I go away, will you forget about me?
I'll never forget you. Never.
The young captain pressed his cheek against Tian's forehead, closing his eyes to take in every emotion that was transpiring between them. It took him a long moment before he could say another word.
But once you've returned to where you belong, just forget about me.
The younger man's eyes shot open as he backed away. Why would you say that?
There are better guys for you out there, with the right social status and everything.
The officer smiled tightly as his eyes dimmed. He pointed towards the sky.
You see the stars? Even if a mountain high and unbeatable, it can't reach the horizon. How can I reach you then?
Tian was rock still. All of the words got stuck in his throat. He had fought hard to cheat death, but he was losing a battle at this moment. The mischief whose once had led the gang rubbed his eyes as tears gushed out. He would have stomped his feet if he could. I will never forget you. Never! Pupa shook his head in an exasperated adoration. He wound his left arm around the shapely head and kissed Tian's forehead to comfort his petulant boy. The dark, intense eyes, filled with tears, slowly closed as his lips parted to say,
Let time be our proof then.
Tian threw his arms around the solid body into a tight embrace as a promise. Even if the night was cold, their impenetrable bond was spreading its heat all over their bodies and hearts. If our love can stand the test of time until that day, I'll be waiting for you right here. Dawn came too early. It was in the blink of an eye when one had to wake up and face the truth that the dream had come to an end. The volunteer teacher put down his pastel diary in the backpack and zipped up all the memory to seal it in the deepest pit. He took in a deep breath and turned to look at the small hut that had sheltered him for the past 3 months with deep sorrow.
Tien, someone's here to pick you up.
A call from the son of the village chief woke him up from the reverie. He grabbed the sporty backpack and stepped out the door. The morning cold breeze came with a cock-a-doodle-doo in the distance. Not far away, the Aka father and son were waiting for him with kind smiles on their faces, as it had always been. He couldn't help feel like something was already missing in his heart, as he wouldn't be able to see these unpretentious, honest smiles anymore. Is Staff Sergeant Yod here? Tian asked, since Kama Bing Le had told him earlier that the military would send Staff Sergeant Yod in the jeep to take him to the bus station downtown.
Uncle Sergeant couldn't come. It was someone else.
The word someone else made his heart thrum. Could it be? When the man showed up behind him, he blurted out with a genuine surprise. Biday! The fair-skinned, Chinese-looking, soon-to-be doctor opened his arm for his brother from another mother, who lurched at him and hugged him like a little boy. He ruffled the boy's hair with an exasperated adoration.
You little rascal. You ran away without telling anyone. Did you know how much chaos it was at home?
I'm so sorry, bro, but I couldn't find any other way to do it. Tian backed away and scratched his neck in embarrassment. He stopped acting like a kid around the older man since he became a junior high school student, but the long absence made him forget his composure. How come did you get here though? You came to take me home?
Once I heard about it, I asked for a leave. My dad's guy drove me here.
You didn't have to bother. Even if it was a statement that showed the etiquette of the speaker, it still surprised someone who had known Tian Sopadisipu all his life like Taichin. He smiled gently.
I wanted to come here. It didn't bother me at all.
Your eyes are hollowed like a panda and you said you're fine? The city boy shrugged as he started walking. Maybe we can stop for lunch in the city. Once again, the future doctor frowned as he examined the younger man, looking at his thin back. Tian looked physically fine, but something in his mind had changed. He turned back to look at the Aka village chief and his son before lifting his hands into a Y. Thank you for taking care of my little brother while he was here. I should be the one who thank you for letting him come here, Tama Bingle said as a man who'd seen the world. We've received so much from Pruthien during the past 2 months, especially his sincerity. Liche nodded in acknowledgement. He couldn't picture how a wealthy boy with a silver spoon could have lived such a hard life, waking up at dawn to teach Hillshire children. The men walked together until they reached a slope that led from the village to the main road where a car was waiting. Tian said goodbye to both the Akas. Uncle, long day, goodbye. Please tell everyone and the kids that if we got a chance, we will meet again. I think you better tell them yourself. As Tian wanted to whip around and scold Long Tay for his nuisance response, he heard tiny voices ring out in unison. PC Tian! The city boy dropped his backpack to the ground, stunned. He dropped to the ground as his little pupils thronged in to hug him with tears and sobbing. The villagers who came to say goodbye to their volunteer teacher stood by, talking in a local dialect that couldn't be translated, yet could be felt by the heart. Goodbye. We'll see each other again. Tai Chin looked at the petulant younger man who was like his younger brother. Tian was soothing a little girl who was bursting into tears and caressed the children's hair with another hand, trying to comfort them. He was speechless as some emotions welled up in him, making his eyes hot. Tian didn't just change, he was transformed. The future doctor picked up his phone to record the scene that would be imprinted in someone's mind. No matter how far ahead the road lied ahead for Tian, he didn't want the boy to forget this day and the cherished memories he had at this place. As he lowered his phone, he said to the man next to him, I got what you mean now. Kama Bingle chuckled lowly and patted the medical student's shoulder. This is a true reward that can only be won by a heart. The city man took off his glasses to wipe the tears in his eyes. I was angry at first how Tian made his mom so worried she fell ill. Now, I'm just glad he decided to do this. It must have been fate or a coincidence that made someone grow up physically and mentally. He had once objected to General Thirayut, who was his father's friend, for letting his youngest son face the hardship alone on the hills despite his fragile physical conditions. But here, seeing the once baby boy turn into someone who did something for others and was receiving so much love in return, he wanted to kick himself for underestimating the younger man. The volunteer teacher looked around for a man he'd waited for, but what he found was disappointment. You do want me to forget you, don't you? He waved to everyone with reddened eyes, trying his best not to burst his dam of emotions in front of the kids. So he grabbed Taichen's hand and dragged the man away as if he couldn't bear being there for another second longer. An expensive silver sedan parked on the shoulder of the dirt road. Once a soldier spotted them emerging on the narrow slope, he hurriedly opened the car's door in the back for them. Achin glanced at the man who remained silent since they left the village. He gently said, It's alright if you want to cry. You can let it out. Tian sniffed and took in a deep breath, shaking his head slowly. No, I'm done crying. He had cried his eyes out last night when they parted ways and kept crying until he dozed off. The warmth from the rough, gentle hands still lingered on his skin. This must be one of the lessons he still had to learn, that no matter how many tears you shed, There was something that couldn't be recalled. Weren't you surprised that no one was coming for you? The future doctor asked to change the subject and lighten up the younger man's mood. I was, but I didn't want to look for the answer. It was better for me that way. The agent's lips tugged into a light smile as he heard the answer that befitted an old version of the boy he knew. Your lady mom was throwing major tantrums. Your father had to insist that it was for the best that you wanted to see the world. Otherwise, you'd be caught and dragged home from the first day he set foot there. I knew who the whistleblower was. It was Tool, who knew about his plan, and he was the last man seen with him before he ran. But, of course, your father was worried about you. He ordered my dad to find someone to watch over you right away. How was he, though? Did the man take good care of you? Tian looked out the window to hide the dregs that lied at the bottom of his heart. Yes, he was a big help. So big, he wouldn't be able to find anyone who could give him this much. You still haven't told me why you ran away to be a volunteer teacher. Tay Chen couldn't figure out no matter how hard he tried. He didn't understand what had inspired the younger man to do something like this. Tian glanced at him briefly and whispered, I thought you already knew. If you meant the donor, yes, I did know about her. But what I don't know is what's going on in your head. I. Tian held his breath before saying, I got tired of everything. I was never happy. So I thought if I tried something new, maybe I would find the answer. The future doctor frowned. How come a man who was born with a silver spoon and had everything handed to him since the day he came into the world said he wasn't happy? You think you found it? The light in the almond eyes dimmed immediately and rendered the older man speechless. No, I haven't. I didn't even get to know it well, and I had to say goodbye. Was he talking about the villagers and the children? Tay Chin ran his hand down his face and looked outside the window, not wanting to probe deeper into the younger man's fragile emotions. 2 hours later, the luxurious sedan reached the city and stopped for breakfast. Then, they were heading towards the destination, Bangkok. The drive was silent, with only soft talks once in a while. They both were tired from what they had gone through as an individual. Tian snuggled up in a soft duvet that Taichin had brought for him. He had a long nap as if to stay in the dream and not having to wake up again. But time never stood still. Finally, the car was stopping in front of the Sofadisakol mansion after a 10-hour journey. The man who got roused opened the car's door, still sleepy until a warm embrace woke him up. My boy! Lady Lalita had waited for this day for nearly 3 months. Every passing day, she had been anxious about how her youngest son fared. Grief would have killed her hadn't Colonel Pitan, her husband's right-hand man, gave them a constant report on their son's well-being. Mom! A mother's gentle touch warmed up Tian's heart. He took her plump body into his embrace and teased her. You've lost weight. Lady Lalita pulled back and slapped her son's forearm. I'm going to smack you! You ran away, now you're teasing me? The boy whined loudly, amused, but as he looked into his mother's red eyes, he was overwhelmed with guilt. Tian lifted his hands to press them together in a Y and gently put them on her soft shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. Lady Lalita was taken aback, stupefied by her boy's genuine action. As Tian had reached puberty, he had always been attached and influenced by his friends or girlfriends and became more distant from his parents. He had always acted as if showing love, affection, and gratitude towards his mom and dad meant the sign of weakness. Even if she knew how it was with teens, no parents would want that. Tears welled up in her eyes as she caressed his hair, feeling proud. It's okay, my love. I'm glad you came home safe and sound. She cupped his face in her two hands, taking in how his skin had slightly darkened. Then her eyes caught the faint bruises on her cheekbones and the corner of his lips. Look at you! What have you done to your pretty face? I give you my word that I will not stop you from doing what you want from now on. Whenever you want to do, whoever you want to hang out with, you can do it. All I ask is one thing. Please, do not risk your life on that hill ever again. A mother's decree made Tien hold his breath. He looked away, unable to say yes, but he didn't resist either. Luckily, that his mom was deep in her concern, she didn't catch on to this small, indistinguishable reaction. Then his eyes caught the sight of his father, who stood slightly in the back. Dad, I. The former general smiled gently, knowing well the words his son was telling him through his eyes. He walked in to tap the thin shoulder a few times before whispering,
We'll talk later. Just go and make your mom feel better.
Ian nodded, swallowing all the words that got stuck in his throat, and let his mom pull him into the house. The light from the living room chandelier bleared his eyes. The baroque cushion with gold rims and bone china from the Ming Dynasty were sparkling in the lights, reflecting extravaganza. He looked around the familiar mansion that became foreign to him, letting out a long sigh. What a different world this is. But this was his world. End of chapter 12.